All right, everyone, it's time to talk about Kamala Harris and her broad overarching ideology. Now, if you just casually listen to her, you wouldn't know much of what her ideology is other than Trump is Hitler, and by the way, I'm going to uplift people, but I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to do that. But really, her ideology writ large is a push towards dystopia, not just for the United States, but for the world. I've pointed out the importance of the American citizenry considering our friends and allies abroad as well when we go to the votes. That's because what the United States does impacts the entire world. We're a big country. We've got the largest economy, the most sophisticated military, a huge amount of diplomatic potential, resources up the ass, and things like that. And there's a lot of countries that are pegged, by the way, to the US dollar, or at least intermixed with it. We have an expansive trade network. We guarantee the shipping lanes for half the world, etc., etc., etc. So what we do actually matters for people who aren't even voting in the election. Certainly matters for people amassing at the border at the moment as well. What I would say, though, is that Kamala Harris, for instance, one of the first things she would do if she's elected is try to push for something akin to the TPP. Now, it won't be called the TPP. They'll try to hide that. They'll fiddle around with the name and some of the words that are in it, but in spirit, 90% of it will be identical. This is a guarantee, by the way. Even many liberals didn't like the idea of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The basic gist of that, this is just talking about world trade. Basic idea is that by creating a free trade situation, people with huge amounts of money to invest could go and screw over small and regional businesses in other countries that are partner to the TPP. And China would have been party to it. They weren't docketed originally, but we know that they would have gotten their way in there because a lot of U.S. politicians make a lot of money from China. And the idea was, for example, a California business person can muscle in on the Vietnamese market and price out a bunch of smaller competitors, consolidating a monopoly within part of Vietnam. A Vietnamese investor would be able to go to California and fundamentally do the same thing. It would lead to the rise of a new wave of mega corporations and box stores and shit like that that would destroy small businesses, regional chains, and private entrepreneurs, the self-employed, gig workers and stuff like that, who can compete with such gargantuan businesses. Especially when many of the countries that would have been party to that will subsidize those businesses and give them free money in order to actually do that. Basically, the state will give you billions of dollars, you muscle in, drive out the competitors by holding the prices lower artificially for a time to drive them out of business. Then you renormalize and you begin turning a profit and you pay back the state that invested in you. Sometimes it's semi-privatized, part of syndicated networks of different corporations. They like to invest in each other as well, including their so-called competitors many times. Just look at when Facebook tried to make LibreCoin. Yeah, that fell flat because the state said knock it off. We want to be the ones to monopolize that because we love to fix the price of currency. While claiming the Chinese do the same thing and it's a big problem, by the way, I would note. That's just one component, though. The anti-free trade network that would be created by Kamala. This is a guarantee. There's a 100% chance she'd at least push for such a thing. And there are enough cuck Republicans, by the way, in Congress for her to get the votes. So that's worry number one. Worry number two is war. And that's because Kamala Harris would be the first female president. Now, if you had a first female president who was like Gabbard, she's actually been in the military, she seems to be rather Trumpian in her foreign policy views, she's rather averse to the world policing, nation-building thing, I wouldn't really have to worry. But if you get a first female president who is a standard neoliberal, following the same neoliberal traits as people like Biden, George W., Clinton, all of these others, my worry is that she will be pressured into starting a war simply because she wants to start a war. Well, I want to be one of the big boys. Part of it would be ego. That'd be fed, by the way, by advisors and by military brass to try to get her to do the same thing. At the end of the day, she would end up folding, even if she didn't really want to engage in a particular conflict, and she would. And you'd have a commander-in-chief that's incapable of conducting diplomacy that's sort of tied in, but problem number three, Kamala's not going to be good at negotiating things. Can you imagine her in a conversation with foreign dignitaries? I can imagine it, and it doesn't look pretty. That's the whole problem. Look at the economic policy. Kamala claims that she wants to save people on taxes. But one of the first things that would happen economically if Kamala is elected is the lapsing of the Trump tax cuts. And if you think that she's going to expand the child tax credit, if you compare her plan to the Vance-Trump plan, you actually make out like a bandit under Trump and Vance, and you get relatively less after only a few short years with Kamala. So unless you're expecting your firstborn child to die within the first couple years of their life, you're actually getting more money back from the government under the proposed plan of Trump and Vance than under Kamala. The extra $1,000 up front pales in comparison to the continued $5,000 payments that Trump has in mind, as opposed to giving you $6,000 the first year and then $3,000 thereafter under the Kamala plan, the Kamala Walz plan. That's another consideration. Look at who the running mates are. Who's the running mates? J.D. Vance, again, military service, reasonably well-spoken, rational. You can call him weird if you want. That basically runs like water off his back at this point. Has been overused. Tim Walz genuinely acts goofy all of the time and does like weird shit. Like he'll just be like, yeah, on stage when he's with Kamala or when he's on his own. And he like say he's trying to be the coach, which he was for a long time. He's trying to get people amped up, but it just comes off as weird. You know, your constituents are not middle school soccer players, Tim. They're adults, rational adults, and when they see you acting like that, they raise an eyebrow at it. Who do I think would be better if the unfortunate happens and the commander-in-chief is incapacitated, killed, or what has to resign or whatever? Vance. Quite clearly, he'd do a better job than Tim Walz. It's not even close. There are other considerations as well. Kamala Harris has wrapped herself in the cloak of idpol this entire time, while vacuously sloganeering and really often not saying anything at all. That's the other problem, the unknown factor. I know how Trump's going to govern. For better or for worse, regardless of what you think of his particular ideology and his stances, they're there. He's made them quite clear from Agenda 47, videos that he's put out at his rallies. We have the litmus test of his actual presidency and what did he do then when he was in office. We can judge him by these things because he actually, we've got the walking of the walk and not just the talking of the talk. With Kamala, we have no attempt to really flesh out elements of the platform, leaving them completely up to interpretation. And we don't have a lot of the walk to go on because as vice president, she was a no-show. Border czar, who visited the border exactly twice for photo ops, and under very favorable conditions, and still managed to fall flat. AI czar, well, certainly big moves have been made in that, but not by the U.S. government, etc., etc. Most often, she was in the shadows, sort of a Dick Cheney vice presidency, and not really making many statements. At least Pence, who I hate to give any credit to at all, frequently visited foreign countries and met with dignitaries and stuff, and seemed to be able to have a general conversation with them. Good vice president? No. A good running mate? Hell no. But did he have a couple of qualities that at least passed the sniff test? Yeah. With Kamala, we don't have that. We have a complete empty suit who pals around with self-professed socialists, won't even release a full platform, who I guarantee would rope-a-dope the United States and many other countries in the Pacific area into a trade partnership that would destroy small businesses all around the area. Hey, Californians and people in Oregon and Washington State, you'd be disproportionately affected by this, by the way. Where do you think that Japanese investor is more likely to settle in, California or Kalamazoo? It's quite clear where the money would be going. And people from Vietnam and Taiwan, eventually China, etc. What looks good on paper, at least at first, when you dig into the details, looks like a pile of shit, basically. Guaranteed that she would promote it. Trump, meanwhile, we know where he stands on it. On day one, it's dead. I won't sign it. Don't even bother putting it on my desk. It's not going to happen. Ta-da! Well, I mean, that was great. Also, the NAFTA reform. That was good, even though it was only a little bit of reform. Every little bit does count now, doesn't it? I think I'll take the dude who reigned over a general time of peace and prosperity over the person who has served under a president who effectively partially collapsed the economy and whose diplomatic weakness caused several major wars to break out. Just saying, I think that that's probably the sane position to have at this time. That's about all. Peace out.